Hi there and welcome to the channel and to this, the 1.5k Q&A. Now, first of all, a huge thank you to everyone who posted questions. I'm going to read out your names as we go. So that having been said, all that remains is really to get on with it. So the first question is from a fellow booktuber, Reading Ideas, and this is a gentleman from the north of England, and I really like his channel. I love his accent and also the fact that he often goes out and about in the beautiful countryside surrounding his home, and he'll be jogging along a track talking about literature or politics or whatever else is on his mind. So I'll put a link to his channel in the description if you'd like to check it out. And his question is, why choose the channel name? Okay, I've answered this numerous times. Basically, my own name is far too common, Jason Kennedy, to use as the name for the channel. So I had to look elsewhere for inspiration. And I decided upon a pun on the title of this book, The Journal of a Disappointed Man. Journal became channel. Now, some people have emailed me to ask if that is where the name of the channel derives from. They've kind of puzzled it out for themselves, and I'll reply and say, yes, you're absolutely right. But I didn't think I would really explain it too many times. Actually, as things have turned out, I seem to explain it every Q&A. But WMP Barbellion is the pseudonym of Eric Cummings, and he was a very interesting man, a prodigy in the natural sciences, and his dream was to work at the British Museum, which he duly achieved. However, he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in his 20s, and he did not live to reach 30, but in the space of his short life, he managed to pack in all of the events that a regular person would pack into their 70 years and 10. So he had a career, he married, he had a child, and it's all in here. This book is where we get to know all of the events of his life, and he considered this work to be his memorial. It was what meant the most to him. And very interestingly, he kept the manuscript very safe in a very small wooden box. And upon one occasion, the box was being transferred from a train at Bristol Templemead Station, I believe. And when it was taken out, the people carrying it believed it was the coffin of a child, and so carried it through the station in very solemn fashion. Very ironic when one considers quite what is inside these pages. Yes, wonderful. Hogarth Press edition here. Introduction by H.G. Wells, and you can also find the text online. So that's where the name of the channel comes from. Next, we have some questions from Valtsane Lumavix, and they have 3 questions here. How do you decide which books to read? Now, here also I made a video called something like How I Find Books to Read. It's 20 minutes or so. I'll put a link to it in the description as well. I won't go back through all of that, but it was very much a case of the library, the used bookstores for random selections of books. You do occasionally find stuff there that you're not familiar with, like, wow, what's this? And then buying books online, targeting books. And that is the part that I probably enjoyed the most. And I'll give you an example of the kinds of books you just can't find in the library and you can't find in the used bookstores. So I have this edition, very nice one, rather expensive these days, of the Journals of Denton Welsh. One of my favourite writers, also lived a very short life as it happens because of illness. And this was edited by Jocelyn Brooke. And that led me to do a little research on Jocelyn Brooke. And would you believe it, he also wrote a kind of novel / memoir, the Orchid Trilogy. And so I had to buy this online. It wasn't expensive, but it's all about knowing what you want. And this is really good. And I'm going to do a video on this in the coming months. So that's one aspect of finding books to read. You know, I will target them. Then also when I'm reading, I will find mentions of other books and then I'll look them up. So that's pretty much how it works. The one thing I don't do is I don't read reviews. Yeah, so I guess that's a little different how many people find books. I don't usually take recommendations from other people that much. Occasionally on the server of A Disappointed Man, I will take a recommendation, but I'm not usually listening to what other people are reading or what their opinions are. It's very much kind of self-directed. Okay. Next, what has making videos on YouTube made you learn? So it's made me learn how to light the room, how to set up the camera angles, how to edit video, all of those practical skills. And I was thinking a little more deeply about this, and what it has made me learn is to accept myself. Seeing my face, hearing my voice hour after hour as I prepare these videos, can you imagine having to do that? After a while, you're either going to detest yourself or just become resigned to who you are. You're just going to have this kind of grudging acceptance, saying, well, that is the face, that is the voice, and we just have to accept the cards we were dealt, okay, and just get over it. So this getting over it part, which I'm not sure I ever really had done up to the point where I started the channel. I was always very awkward socially. I've never been happy being looked at or photographed, this kind of thing. And so the channel has really helped. And what it's given me is an objective view of myself. I now have a good idea of how I sound, a good idea of how I look. And when I'm out and about, when I'm interacting with people, I have more of a sense of what I'm doing. I have more of a sense of what they're seeing and hearing. And because of that, I think it has definitely improved the way I am received. So making a channel can have quite a big impact on one's life outside of just the production of content. And then I had another answer, which was the channel is a chance to live out my values. You know, it's not for profit, it's for everyone. I talk about what I care about the most. Of course, I can do that in the classroom, but here I feel even more liberated than I would in the classroom. I can talk about things that are rather obscure, and it won't matter because people will tune in if they want to. Whereas when you're in the classroom, you have this captive audience and you can't just wander off talking about your favorite 30s novels or the French novels that you're reading at the moment. You have to stick to your syllabus and you kind of have to keep it relevant to the people you're addressing. So the channel permits me to have much more freedom and, as I say, to live out my values. So there's your answer to that. The next question: which authors of today do you think will still be read 100 years from now? I'm really the wrong person to ask, aren't I? Because I don't focus on any contemporary writers on the channel, so you can probably guess what my answer is going to be. I'm not really sure there'll be any authors still read in 100 years from those working today. Obviously, Shakespeare, Milton, these people will still be being read, but will people still be reading Margaret Atwood or Sally Rooney? Will people still be reading? That is another question, isn't it? Or will AI get in the way? And when you say what book you want to read, AI will kind of modify it to cater to your own preferences. Yeah, there could be that kind of thing too. So there's no such thing anymore as the original text. Everything will kind of be remixed to suit your own personal requirements. I can imagine a situation like that. So I think going forward 100 years is too difficult to predict. Might be more interesting just to see where we are 20 years from today looking back. I think we'll be in a whole new world pretty soon. Okay, so turn over. Let's find some more questions. Another difficult to say name, Olga Seiferte. It might be a handle, so then it doesn't matter too much if I'm getting it wrong. But if that is your real name, Olga, then I'm sorry if I just destroyed the pronunciation. Can you recommend an English thesaurus? That's a good, easy question, isn't it? I don't have one in particular I would recommend. What I'll do is I'll just show you the one I use. I do get rather frustrated with undergraduates when they don't use a thesaurus, they only use a dictionary. I really feel they should be used in combination. And the one I have here is a Penguin College thesaurus, and this is fine. And what I also find with the undergraduates is they really like the dictionary on Grammarly, which is just a travesty of a dictionary. Call me an old fuddy-duddy, but I believe you should have dictionaries that really do have very detailed entries, and Grammarly is pathetic. It really is. So I tell them not to use Grammarly, and I also tell them that they really should also use a thesaurus to help them improve their writing. And I have some dictionaries here to show you too. So I've got one here. I picked this up cheap, Oxford Advanced Learners, and this is very good. So that is English. as we tend to say out here in Taiwan, because we also, of course, have American English. I have this Webster's New World Dictionary. I really like these, you know, for the letters, and it's kind of put them in pairs. So A, B, C, D. It's like one of those old telephone directories. It's quite an old dictionary now. It's got a useful map of the USA inside and a whole bunch of, oh, what are these? Pronunciation key. Okay, so you want an American English dictionary and an English one. And then I'll show you a few more reference books that I do make use of. So there's this one. I like these Oxford Companions. So this is the one to the English language. It's a real doorstop. And I use the entry on academic English with the undergraduates. So I'll just read you a little of it and you'll see why I think this is such a useful book. Oh, here it is, marked. Academic usage, also academic English. The register of English used by scholars and scientists, an elevated and often complex style associated with concern for accuracy, objectivity, and dispassionate comment, and characterized by the following 4 features, which I won't bore you with, but you can see how useful this can be. First question there for the students would be perhaps, what is the difference between a scholar and a scientist, right? That is interesting in itself. And this is quite an extensive entry. And then it says, see EAP, notes and references, register, and sociologies under style and usage. Okay, so these can be very useful. You just thumb through them in your spare time and just mark up any entries you think are of relevance to what you're doing. And I have another one here of philosophy, because sometimes, you know, when the students are writing about particular texts, there may be some philosophical angle they've kind of taken an interest in. So I've got this here. Oh, Paul Grice is the on the first page I've opened up, and he's very famous actually for his kind of armchair philosophy of the language, sometimes associated with J.L. Austin. Okay, so he's known for some of these principles of communication, and here it's got this conversational implicature. Yeah, that is right. Okay, so this is very useful too. Oh, sorry. And finally, one more. Penguin Dictionary of Literary Terms and Literary Theory. And this again is very useful, particularly for all the rhetorical terms. Sometimes what I find is undergraduates and graduates, they're very weak at describing the kind of patterns in a text. And there are all these rhetorical terms available. So for example, Howl, Allen Ginsberg, the poem, I think it's got the, is it oh? Is that how he uses it? It's got like the start of each line has the same word, like, oh, this is this, and oh, this is this, and oh. Well, that is called anaphora, when you have the repetition of a word in a rhythmic structure. And then you can also have to do with word order. If I had a sentence like, I fed the fuel into the fire, okay, or into the fire the fuel was fed, okay, so that one is a kind of reversal, and that's called anastrophe. So you can learn these. Then if you had an example like, sometimes you see this kind of tautology or redundancy, like the fish darted swiftly away. Well, when something darts, it moves quickly. So darted swiftly is kind of, yeah, tautologous or a redundancy, pleonasm. All right, so this book, these will help you by giving you all kinds of examples of those. So I do use those in my scholarly work, but as I say, many people can see them on the page, but they just don't know what those things are called. So there you go as regards reference books. Next, do you watch the films which are adaptations of books? Which are your favorite? Well, the short answer is no, I don't. I like watching productions of Shakespeare plays, so I have a whole bunch of those RSC productions downloaded. However, they're contemporary, so of course what they usually do is you'll have the Merchant of Venice and they're trading on the stock market. So instead of being dressed in the clothes of Renaissance Italy, they're dressed in flashy suits, yes, like they're dealing on the Wall Street Stock Exchange. Or you'll have a military figure like in Othello, and they'll be wearing a uniform of like the US Air Force or something like this. So I don't like all of this updating of costume. No, I prefer it to be done in the traditional fashion. It should look like the Elizabethan stage, ideally. but I do enjoy seeing Shakespeare performed, and they're pretty faithful to the text itself. And it just gives you a better grasp of the dynamics of the play. As for movie adaptations, I do watch them if they're in the public domain because I like to include clips in my videos. So I've just done that for Washington Square by Henry James, and I did it also for Little Lord Fauntleroy. And the book I was reading today, if I can find it here, was this. The Prisoner of Zenda by Anthony Hove. And this was superb, only 140 pages, absolutely thrilling. And I want to do a video about this, so I checked. And there is indeed a movie from 1937, which is in the public domain. So I can include clips from that when I produce my video for you. So there's the answer there. I'm not really into watching movies. Next one, burnout. Okay, so a question on burnout. Have I felt it? What do I recommend to do to avoid it? So I guess many people do experience or suffer from burnout these days. It's not just something that only happens to teachers, and I have felt it at various points. And about a year ago, I made a decision to stop holding down a single main job 6 days a week, and to basically try and find 3 or 4 different jobs. And so now, rather than teach school children every day, I do it just 1 day a week, which will change to 2 in September. And I also have an office job. I do some editing, so I go there 2 days a week. And I also have the channel, which I do at the weekends. And in September, I'll also be teaching at the university. So I have 4 things there that I'm doing, and being able to switch between different kinds of work in different locations with different colleagues, that is really a big help for me in avoiding burnout. And I was thinking about how my ideal job would be, my ideal life rather, would be to have a different job on every day of the week. Like on Monday, you're a pilot. On Tuesday, you're a doctor. Wednesday, you're a policeman. Thursday, you're doing some fishing. Friday, I don't know, a lawyer. Okay, and Saturday and Sunday, maybe have a few days off. But unfortunately, it's just not possible, is it? Unless you're that Leonardo DiCaprio character from Catch Me If You Can, or an actor. I think actors must have a really good life, being able to swap between all of these different people they're portraying. So I can either be a con man or an actor, or just accept my present conditions. So that is what I have established for myself, a lifestyle where I switch between different kinds of work each day of the week, pretty much. Yeah, that's my cure for burnout. Next one. How much do you watch YouTube yourself? How much time do you devote to... Aren't they the same question twice? Okay, so never mind. A few hours a day, I would say. Although my phone says it's more than that. You know, you get those statistics at the end of every month saying you've basically spent your whole life watching YouTube, right? But part of that is because I often fall asleep to YouTube videos. I find that many of them are very good for pushing me off into the arms of Morpheus. And so what I watch is pretty much all politics. That is my passion. Not just UK politics, but international politics, foreign policy. So I have a bunch of shows that I watch, and they follow different schedules. Some they have 2 or 3 shows a day, and then there are others that are just weekly or fortnightly, and others that are just sort of once every couple of days. But I try and keep up with all of that. It's a considerable amount of viewing. I'm not going to say which shows because I don't want to reveal, not betray. I don't want to reveal my politics to the people watching. I have said in the past that the channel of A Disappointed Man is a kind of politics-free space. Okay, I don't watch much BookTube, and the reason for that is I don't really find anyone who ticks all the boxes in terms of what I would watch. It will be things like their diction. I don't feel that they're speaking in very well-formed sentences and they're not using an interesting vocabulary, which seems very strange to me because some of these booktubers say they've been reading for 30 or 40 years, and yet their vocabulary doesn't seem to have expanded accordingly. That is mysterious to me. And then there's also the style. So many of the people booktubing are rather too forceful, too aggressive for my taste, particularly the male booktubers. Excuse me. And then there is the just press record and then talk for half an hour approach. So I feel people are kind of wandering off or rambling, and again, that's something of a turn off for me. And then there's the content, of course. So many people focus on contemporary writing, so again, I kind of switch off from that. So for that reason, there aren't many booktubers that I follow anymore. I said I like reading ideas, and there's also another new channel, The Great Literary Rabbit Hole, with Candy, and she's from the Midlands where I grew up, and I really like her channel. It's unique, and I believe in a year or so she'll probably have 10 or 20,000 people following her. I'll put a link to her channel in the description too. If you know any other booktube channels you think I might enjoy that are similar in spirit and style to the channel of A Disappointed Man, well, just tell me in the comments below. And if you have your own booktube channel and you just want to promote yourself also, you could just add it in the comments, no problem. Now, the next question. How do you feel, or have you heard, about postcrossing? I had to look it up in truth. And it's something to do with you send postcards to other people and then other people send postcards to you. I think I've pretty much encapsulated the concept there. And with the mail service in Taiwan, this would be a very dumb thing for me to get involved with, because half of my letters go astray when they arrive here in Taiwan, and I'll spend a considerable amount of time chasing them up. And actually it got to the point where I have all of my mail directed to the university, and then I just go in once a week and see what's arrived for me, because prior to that, pretty much everything was getting lost. So if you live in Taiwan, you're not really going to get engaged in post-crossing. And then what's this one? Do you write a diary or commonplace book? And my answer to that is no, not really. The reading that I do keep a list. I think it's important to know everything that you've read, so I file it carefully on my computer if I'm reading PDFs. And regarding the books I read from the library and the books I buy, yeah, I do keep a list of them on my website, which I haven't updated for a month or two, but they're pretty much all there. So I think it is important to know what you've read, particularly if you want to go back to it and extract from it. But a diary, no, I don't feel any need to write a diary. A commonplace book, again, not really, but I do use Obsidian for my scholarly work, which does function a little like a commonplace book. I'm always adding quotes there and mapping the relationship between different scholars or different works as I sort of make progress with developing ideas for academic papers. So yes, Obsidian. I like the mind mapping approach, and that is really good. You can have this thing called an infinite canvas, and you can just drop in the documents and draw very simply arrows that link them to one another and put little titles for each one. So I've done that, and that is really useful in my work, and that kind of does track what I'm reading. So basically the only part of my life that I wish to remember is pretty much what I've read, and other things like how I felt that day and stuff like that. No, that's kind of just ephemeral, and I'm happy for that just to sort of vanish into the ether. Next, I think it's a different person. Yes, Michael Bully 3210, and he asks, can you name 3 crucial Virago Press titles that you can recommend? Because they noticed that I have them in pride of place right behind me. Now, for those who don't know, Virago Press publishes feminist works, and that means generally that their books are written by women, but not always. And I'm going to highlight one that isn't written by a woman. Now, where did I put them? They are around here somewhere. Oh yes, down here. So the first one is by a man, and it is George Gissing with The Odd Women. And if you like this picture, which you tend to see everywhere, don't you? Because it's got the girl reading. So if you're looking at literature websites, it's by Perugini, I believe. Charles Perugini, is that right? A kind of Anglo-Italian artist. Charles Edward Perugini, that is right. So if you didn't know who it was by, now you do. And this is excellent. It's about the odd women. It doesn't just mean odd as in unusual, it means odd as in left over, you know, odd and even. And it's about the fate of all these unmarried women in the Victorian period, and it is considered a proto-feminist work by one of my favourite writers, George Gissing. And George Gissing also wrote, I recommend this if you haven't read any of his stuff, Born in Exile, superb. And I believe that Godwin Peak in this book is the closest thing you'll find in a novel to Jason Kennedy, The Disappointing Man. We're really peas in a pod. And interestingly enough, Barbellion, the Journal of a Disappointed Man. This book, he also saw a lot of himself in Godwin Peak in Born in Exile. Gissing's most famous novel is New Grub Street, which is absolutely superb as well. Highly recommended. And Gissing was particularly admired by George Orwell, of course. And then moving on, Elizabeth Taylor, not the movie star. And she is an excellent writer. I guess it would be called kind of middle brow. The thing that distinguishes her is how varied her novels are. So some of them are just awful, and then others are really good, and they're all about very different things. So she doesn't just write the same book over and over. This one was very funny, about life at a rooming house. And what is it? Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont as well. That is also by Elizabeth Taylor, isn't it? That is really funny as well. So any Elizabeth Taylor is worth reading. And then lastly, Virago also published this Jonah's Gourdvine by one of my favorite African-American writers, Zora Neale Hurston, and this was really enjoyable too. So it's not that I have 3 in particular I would recommend. I'm just showing you some of what you'll find if you read Virago. And they also tend to have beautiful artwork. Whoever chooses the artwork, I've mentioned this before, so you'll often find, I believe, Picasso is quite often favoured, but most of their books have wonderful paintings adorning their covers. So, highly recommended publisher. They're still going, I believe. Now, the next question was from, it's some more from Olga Zyferte. They added some more afterwards. Do you read self-improvement or psychology books? And the answer to this is not really, not dedicated self-improvement books or psychology books. However, I have a kind of glib answer, I suppose, which is every work of literature, in effect, is a self-improvement book. Wouldn't you agree? So I do read to cultivate the self, is my point there. But do I read books that say how to be less anxious, or that are engaging with that, or I don't know, how to improve your relationships with your family? No, not those kinds of things. And do I read books that just talk about how the mind works so that you can see more deeply into yourself? No, not particularly. Although I do have some books that are considered masterpieces of psychology. So for example, this one, Journey Round My Skull by the Hungarian Figyes Karinti. This is superbly written, introduction by Oliver Sacks, and this is all about what happened when he suddenly developed this, well, it turned out to be a brain tumour, but he didn't know that when it first happened, and some very strange phenomena were occurring to him. He was hearing trains slowing down and then speeding up, and the strange thing was there were no trains in his city. So how could he be hearing trains all day? So it turned out this was an effect of the tumour. And he writes about his account. He writes his account of having brain surgery while he's conscious, and it's just a really astounding book. And he was a highly, highly cultivated man, superb intellectual. So I do have some masterpieces of psychology. I'll show one more, but I have to duck out of the shot for a second. And it is Memoirs of My Nervous Illness by Daniel Paul Schreiber. Yes, Lacan wrote about Schreiber, so did Freud. And this is superb too. He was a German jurist, and he began having all of these strange visions, and also believing that at various times he was changing from a man into a woman and then back again. So very interesting book. Yes, so I strongly recommend this, also by New York Review of Books Classics. So yes, I am interested in psychology, but not that kind of pop psychology where it's about your kind of your own psychology. And then one more down here. This man also suffered from mental illness, Gerard de Nerval, and he produced some wonderful books, yes, about written while he was in an asylum and sometimes dealing with his life inside the asylum. So I'd also recommend his Sylvie. He's excellent. Okay, so French writer. You can't really be interested in literature without being interested in psychology, is my point there. Do you have any plants, or are you growing something on your balcony? All right. So if you go back far enough, I did make some videos out on the balcony. So at one time I was trying to grow the channel on the balcony, but my neighbors were too noisy and I had a dog out there that would just never stop howling. So I kind of gave that up. And right now we've had a kind of disaster strike us because the avocado plants we'd been growing for over 6 years, well, they're basically trees by now, but a squirrel broke them up for nesting material. So now they look absolutely terrible and they're about half the size they were. So that's pretty disappointing. We have some swallows nesting on the balcony too, and we also have geckos. I found a grasshopper out there the other day, rhinoceros beetle, all kinds of wildlife congregates on this 5th floor balcony. So there you go. But I'm not growing any food or anything productive out there. It's just strictly a bit of nature, you know, up here in the sky. All right, now the next question is from Errata9968, a very old friend of the channel. Yeah, stuck with me right from the beginning. And he asks, or she, of all the countries you've visited or lived in, which has been your favorite and why? For the natural beauty, I would have to say Guatemala. For a small country, it has such varied terrain. You've got jungle, you've got desert, you've got Atlantic coast, you have Pacific coast, you've got the mountains. Yeah, so I'd say for natural beauty in a small country, it's difficult to beat Guatemala. The people are also incredibly friendly. Mexico is also an amazing country and very beautiful too. And Costa Rica, I really enjoyed the time in Costa Rica. So those subtropical locations in the New World. I also have to say, having lived in Taiwan for over 15 years, that I pretty much owe everything to Taiwan. These days, it's where I found my wonderful wife, and it's the first place I've ever managed to really make much progress in terms of having a career. Also, it's not too difficult to save when you live here. The cost of living is not too expensive. It's incredibly safe. I saw a survey today that said Taipei City is the 2nd safest city in the world to roam around at night. First place was Abu Dhabi, and that is a very, what would you say, a very authoritarian regime that guarantees people's safety there, whereas Taiwan is a fully fledged democracy, and yet it's still incredibly safe. Taiwan is also very beautiful too, but it's not so easy to get out into nature here as it was when I was living in Guatemala. So those would be my 2 choices. I also love Scotland. I've entertained dreams of living in Edinburgh. I think I've mentioned that previously on the channel, but I would settle for just summer trips to Scotland. Yeah, that would be enough, and just be based in Taiwan. Yeah, that would kind of be the optimum solution. Another question. Is there any method to your book shelving? Are you able to locate a book easily? Now, my wife would say not at all, and no, he can't. But I'm going to say yes, there is, and yes, I can. And I don't know if I should turn the camera or not. I won't. I'll just signal. There is order. Over here, you can't quite see. It's out of shot, but it's all my African American literature. Underneath are all of the books for my research into illness narratives. Then on the top here, it's not so organized. These are just kind of, in place, but although there are the romantic poets here. Then I've got my feminist writing and my women's writing. Then the French, all the French books are on 3 shelves now. It started out as 1. It's now taken over this bookcase. And then we have, it kind of works by period now. So this is Victorian stuff behind me. So Wilkie Collins, Rider Haggard, Dickens. There's a shelf here of Dickens. Then you go down and it's Thomas Hardy and Henry James. And at the bottom, I've got some big hardbacks of like Oscar Wilde and stuff like that. Then up here, we've got a selection of John Buchan novels and then some history. And underneath, all 1930s, 2 shelves. And then at the bottom, European literature from the 20th century. And then you go over and there's travel, there's anthropology, right? There's history. And then you get classics, which are just by publisher. So all of the Penguins with the blue spines, the silver spines, the Oxford World's Classics. You can see those in the Grand Bookshelf tour. And Penguins with the black penguins. and then poetry, drama, the Middle Ages, the classical world, literary theory. You can see what I'm talking about, right? My wife is absolutely wrong. They are pretty well organized. So yes, I can find anything I'm looking for, usually pretty swiftly. Let's have another question. Oh, we can turn over now. A new person. And this one is, there's so many of these Eastern European names on here. This one is Vodeny Medved. Name 3 of your favorite authors who have been awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. And I've written them in underneath. I did a little research. And the ones I've chosen are Gide, André Gide, Luigi Pirandello, the great Italian writer, and Kipling, the youngest Nobel Prize laureate. And I've put a question mark for Kipling because if Conrad had been awarded the Nobel Prize, then I would have swapped out Kipling for Conrad. But I think Kipling's novels in some way are the closest approximation to Conrad of anyone who's won, if that makes sense. So yeah, those would be my 3 names, but I'm not someone who follows Nobel Prize winners. And reading through the whole list as research, I was quite interested to see just who was there, and more interestingly, of course, who was not. Next one, as a teacher, how do you teach students to love and understand poetry? Do you think poetry is dying out? Okay, that's 2 questions really. The first one is, I'm not sure it's really easy to teach poetry. What you do want to do is get the students to really open up to the beauty of language itself, rather than thinking so much about characters and plot. And I do find undergraduates and graduate students are much more interested in what is happening in a story than how it's constructed or even the language being used. They don't seem to care in the slightest about, is the language beautiful, and how are you going to draw someone toward reading poetry if they don't have any feeling for the beauty of language? Because poetry, of course, is just all about how beautiful words can be. So it's not easy to deal with in a teaching situation, other than, as I said, emphasizing in my practice, getting into the fact that this writing is of a finer quality than this writing. It's better constructed. There's more attention being paid to the sound value of the words, and then hopefully you can push people towards reading poetry. But when I look at some contemporary writing, for example, like Alice Munro, there's nothing at all in her choice of words that is poetic in the slightest sense. It's closer to the writing to the language you'd find in an application form than it is to Shakespeare. And that is really dispiriting. And in a world like that, a world that values writing like that, I mean, she did win the Nobel Prize after all, it's really looking bleak for poetry as a genre, isn't it? Unless you're just going to have poetry which is equally as bland as the work of Alice Munro. So yeah, you're right. It's a difficult moment. It's always a difficult... Poetry is one of those things that is permanently in crisis, right? A little like the humanities themselves. It's permanent crisis for as long as you care to go back. Let's have another question. Oh, this is from Anna Saiba, a good friend, great friend of the channel, also been there from the very beginning. Since you launched the channel, are there any literary genres or periods that you had little interest in, but now appreciate? Well, not just appreciate, but dominate. It would be French literature, wouldn't it? When you look at the output of the Channel of a Disappointed Man compared to other booktubers who are white and European like myself, then I think it's rather notable how much coverage I've given of French literature. I really wasn't that much into French literature before starting the channel, but since then, learning French, reading French, buying French books has become a huge interest of mine. And let me just have a little look and see if there's any more I would recommend down here. Well, we've got Madame Bovary, of course. This one I do use with the undergraduates. Raymond Queneau, Exercises in Style. I've pointed this out before. Great for anyone you know who's just getting into doing their own writing and you want to encourage their imagination. It's a single incident which is then retold in many different styles, including as an anagram, as an official letter, using the past tense. in the present, the passive. What's this one? Apocope. I'm not sure what that is. This rather goes back to what I was saying about these rhetorical terms. Cross-examination as comedy, asides, right? But they're all the same incident being retold again and again. There's also times where it's, yeah, there's one here I have to show you. He also retells it as music. So exercises in style. It's part of the Oulipo movement. Then what else have we got here? Margaret Duras's The Lover. My video on this is one of the most popular on the channel. And then there are my Jules Verne novels in French that I've been reading. Okay, so my French is good enough to read and enjoy these. I can conclusively state after reading Jules Verne in the original that H.G. Wells is a much better writer than Jules Verne. You heard it from The Disappointed Man. Yes, not a great writer, Jules Verne, but very informative and very imaginative, which is what you want from a 19th century sci-fi writer. Okay, so that has been the big change. It's all the French literature. And the next question. Could you please recommend authors from these periods or specific genres? Well, I kind of did that, didn't I? As a teacher, are you thinking of making some more educational videos, like getting more from your reading? It depends if people enjoyed that. If you leave comments about what you might be interested in, then I might do some more stuff about, I don't know, just the business of reading, not just for pleasure, but to try and cultivate oneself or develop one's knowledge of literature. I guess I could do that, but I'm open to suggestions there. Could you please tell us what being in touch with readers from all over the world brings to your own reading journey? Well, having the server of A Disappointed Man, which I really wish more people would have joined, we're still stuck on 41 members after more than a year. It's just hit a plateau from which it doesn't seem to be ready to budge. So if you'd like to communicate with me directly and a bunch of other people who follow the channel, then if you use Discord or you download Discord, just follow the link in any of the videos on this channel and you can just click and join. It's completely free and you can begin interacting, and we post there about what we're reading, book hauls, questions, weird words, all kinds of stuff. So I'm disappointed, yeah, that more people haven't taken up that opportunity. And what's been great is all of the communication, from the comments to the emails people have sent, some of the free books people have sent, and then just the constant back and forth on the Discord server. It's all made a huge difference in terms of how I feel about what I'm doing. It's given me a sense of increased self-worth. Yes, I believe I'm doing something meaningful by operating this channel, and I know that in some small way it adds something to the lives of a certain number of people. It's not a huge number, even though I'm doing my 1.5k subscribers. When I look, there's probably only about 250 of you actually who are very active in terms of your support for the channel, but to have an audience of 250 is still an enormous privilege, and who knows where we'll be a year or 2 years from today. So it has really not so much changed my reading practice, but it's changed how I feel about the whole business of reading and sharing what you've read and hearing what other people think. Yeah, being part of my own community, basically founding my own community. Yeah, that has been really good, really, really positive. Anyone else who wants to know what that is like, well, then you could always just start your own BookTube channel and begin developing a community of your own. You're always welcome to send me a link or leave a reply on one of my videos just promoting your channel or saying you've just started one. What is this one? What are the best books you've read this year? Okay, so this is pretty easy to answer. Sorry, I need another drink. It's very hot here today. My mouth keeps getting dry. So easy to answer because the best two books I've read this year are by the same author, Andre Gide. Straight is the Gate, review number 31, and let me find it. Where is it? Oh, maybe I'm not going to be able to find it. I'll just say what it is anyway. La Symphonie Pastorale by Gide. Yes, absolutely superb. And nothing else I've read this year has come anywhere close, I'm afraid. So if you haven't read any Gide, I sincerely recommend them. The most sensitive of writers, and such powerful, powerful books. Oh, just brilliant. I want to read every word Gide wrote in French and in translation, I suppose. Yeah, everything. That's one of the things I'm going to focus on when I go and purchase books online this year is Gide. And they do have a considerable Gide section in the university library, so you can look out for some more videos about him. Okay. And if you haven't watched my review of Straight is the Gate, yeah, review number 31, you might want to check that out. Any book? No, sorry, that is the same. Oh, any books you would recommend for surviving high temperatures? I don't know. Is there a book called something like Surviving High Temperatures, a practical book written by one of those wilderness experts? I came up with one, a joke, Ice by Anna Kavan. Yeah, cult book, right? Ice, keep you cool. Let's turn over. And here we have some questions from someone. I presume this is not their real name, unless they're a cyborg, because they are called 8AB-93SL. Okay. Which of Dostoevsky's works do you regard most highly? All right, so I haven't read all of them. Would be an issue here. So of the ones I've read, which are Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, The Gambler, Notes from the Cellar is the Russian title actually, but it's usually translated Notes from Underground. And then I've read some short stories. The one I enjoyed the most actually is The Gambler, but as a work of art, Crime and Punishment would stand higher than that. And I haven't read yet The Brothers Karamazov, which I do intend to read, and I have a couple of editions of it down there. All I can really say is that, of course, Dostoevsky stands head and shoulders above pretty much everyone else in terms of the history of the novel. A superb writer. Would you ever consider creating a thoughtful critique of Thomas Bernhard's The Loser? Absolutely, it's still my intention to complete my Thomas Bernhard series, and that of course would mean making a thoughtful video about The Loser. However, the next Thomas Bernhard work I'm going to focus on is The Rest is Slander, a wonderful collection of his short pieces, so please watch out for that. The Loser, someday, hopefully someday soon, it will have its turn in the sun. Next question. I've heard that you take a critical view of Peter Handke's work. If you don't mind sharing, why is that? Well, I've only read one work by Peter Handke. It was a novella titled The Afternoon of a Writer, and it stands out in my memory as one of the worst things I've ever read. It featured a writer leading this very self-consciously writerly existence, sipping coffee in their perfect apartment, and then opening up letters from their adoring fans, and then putting on their overcoat and trudging through the deserted city, thinking very lofty thoughts as he proceeded on his way. I just couldn't really understand what it was trying to do. It felt like a piece of self-mythologizing garbage, in truth. And so that is what I found my judgment of Handke's work upon. Not a very large sample, I freely admit that, but if I'm wrong, if that just happens to be an extremely weak offering and he's produced much stronger work that you wish to point me towards, by all means do so, and I'll give him another try. Can't say fairer than that. And finally from this person, if you've read any of W.G. Seabold's work, I'd love to hear your thoughts on his writing. Now, I've read Austerlitz and most of the Rings of Saturn, and he is a superb writer, undoubtedly, and I really do enjoy the cadences of his writing, and he does share some affinities with Thomas Bernhard, and he does freely acknowledge his debt to Bernhard, so obviously I find his work to my taste. However, I have some reservations about how warmly he was embraced by the European cultural elite, because I do feel that the fact that he's not so satirical, he's not so aggressive as Bernhard is, allows these Europeans to kind of perform their unhappiness and regret about the enormities committed in the Europe of the 20th century without really having to suffer without really taking anything along the lines of genuine responsibility. So I think he was kind of used, him and his work, as a balm for the conscience of the Europeans that he was criticizing, if that makes sense. And I feel that sometimes he accepted awards in good humor and appeared and spoke at events that Bernhard would really have rejected, or have taken the opportunity to mount the stage and turn his fire on his hosts. And so for that reason, I prefer Bernhard to Seabold, although they are both excellent, excellent writers. Okay, moving on. We have another person. Oh, I didn't mention him in the roll call of BookTubers that I view, but it is Ridiculous. And he's an American who resides in Thailand and is a teacher like myself. And he has an excellent channel. I'll leave a link to it in the description. And he asked me if I engage at all with Taiwanese society or culture or its literature, its folk humor, its opera, etc. And I have to say, I have a very short answer to this question. No, Dan, I don't. I happen to be a person who is rather like a snail, in as much as I carry my home on my back, and my home is this room, and specifically all the books contained therein. And I'm not someone who, wherever I have lived, has really taken any pains to engage deeply with the culture or the society I happen to be living alongside. And in my defense, I would note that it's a common plaint of many Taiwanese professors in the humanities that Taiwanese themselves take no interest in their own literary tradition or even their folk culture, and instead prefer to read novels from Korea or Japan. And so I'm not alone in not engaging with Taiwanese culture. There are many more people on this island just as guilty as I am of this sin. In fact, they are more guilty because they ignore their own culture. Whereas, of course, as an English person, I am thoroughly acquainted with my own culture, as well as that of the French literature and the American literature and the Hispanic literature I enjoy. Okay. Wow, I'm really starting to defend myself. I feel under pressure after reading that question. All right, moving on. Another person here, I like this name, Bahu the Second. Sounds like a king of somewhere or other. Would you ever read the Bible for literary purposes? Why or why not? Well, of course, I'd be happy to read the Bible, and I did read the story of Joseph quite recently, and I was struck by the episode of Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Joseph goes to work in Potiphar's house, and his wife becomes attracted to him, but when he rejects her advances, she confects an allegation of sexual assault, and Potiphar has Joseph thrown in prison. Well, of course, that is basically the plot of Phaedra. So I was really struck with the similarities between those two texts, and I like to read my Bible in the King James Version. I just love the English of that version. But what I don't do is I don't look to the Bible as a source of moral guidance. I'm not religious in any sense, so I treat it just as a collection of texts that one can refer to and enjoy, but they don't occupy a privileged place in my imagination or in my room. They're just stories. Okay, so another East European sounding name here, Oleksandr Kore. Hi Jason, do you have a favorite reading place with your favorite reading armchair or favorite lamp? I have a few favorite reading places dotted around the apartment. So one is over here in this room, and there's a computer and a monitor, and I can do my research here. And I have an angle poise lamp, which is really useful for just focusing on the text. And I have a footstool because I like to read with my feet off the ground. That is one of my habits. And in the lounge, there is a sofa. So I'll read on the sofa if my wife is in there. And then when it's bedtime, I'll also read in bed. So that's in the house. And then I'll also read basically anywhere I can sit down, with 3 exceptions that I can think of: on the bus, on an aeroplane, or in a dentist chair, but anywhere else. So I do a considerable amount of reading on the train, and I still have my pencil there. I'll be frantically marking up the text and making notes. I don't really care what anyone else around me is thinking. As long as I don't knock or jostle other people, I just get on with it. And then in restaurants, I will eat while we're having a meal, a habit that my wife deplores. And yes, any bench, if I'm waiting for a bus or waiting for a train, out come the books and I'll start reading. So there you have it. Next, another person. Let me see. Oh, these are from the server. So I know the people here quite well. The first is a teacher like myself from Belgium. And he asks, if you could pick one book to read for the first time again, blindly and with fresh eyes, which would it be? And my answer here is it could be any book. Because honestly, it doesn't matter to me. When I reread a book, I don't find it less enjoyable than the first time. In fact, usually my second reading is more enjoyable. I'm not bothered about the fact that I know how the story ends, and so I pretty much read everything with these fresh eyes. So this question doesn't really apply to me. And then the next one, why do you prefer literature from the past to contemporary literature? Well, I feel that if you want to understand the contemporary world, then politics and journalism and non-fiction books are the way to go. And so what would I get from reading literature of a contemporary nature right now? Just entertainment, I guess, but not the kind of insight that you're going to get from those other forms of media. And so I just prefer to read books from other periods, and you really get this sense of another place, a vanished place, coming out when you read them. And also I do believe there's a quality argument. I think literacy levels have plummeted over the course of the last 100 years, and so the kind of vocabulary that is used today is nothing like the rich and ornate language that you'll find in centuries past, and that is another reason for me to favour works that are older. All right, and lastly, are you into music? I am, and I'll come on to that with the final question because that is also music related. Now some questions from David. One final book you can read, a reread or something new, what would it be? Well, if it was my last book, what kind of scenario is this? Sounds like a kind of deathbed scenario, David. So the last book I could ever read, it would definitely not be something new. I don't want to be disappointed with my final reading experience. So I would say The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, because that is possibly the most entertaining book I've read. A sensation novel. It's really superb. There've been many TV adaptations. Maybe some of you have seen those. If not, you could always consider reading the novel. It's just brilliant from start to finish. Amazing characters and a great story. So that would be my choice there. And then David asks, any reading pet peeves? Stylistic tics you find especially distasteful? Gimmicks you find especially tired or hackneyed? All right, so I have one, which is stories which are narrated in the third person, where the opening words of the novel are the name of a character. You don't know who this person is, and there they are. There is their name, the first two words of the story. I really do object to that. I prefer these novels like Henry James, where the first 5 or 6 pages are all describing the scene, and you don't actually meet the protagonist until, yes, a little way into it. Yes, I prefer this. I like the writers to work harder to create the story world than just expecting you to fill in a world behind this proper name they present you with. That basically invites you just to locate them in our world, contemporary society, rather than in a world which is slightly at an angle to our own, right? I don't want to just read a story where the world of the story is simply the world we're living in now. That seems very strange to me. Each writer should be developing their world. It reminds me of a comment that Maurice Blanchot made about Kafka. And he said, if you take a Dickens novel and a Kafka novel, and there's a chair in each of the novels, that the chair in the Kafka novel is not the same as the chair in the Dickens novel. If you think for a moment, you'll see there's something insightful and deep about that comment, and that's why I think is kind of neglected in some of the contemporary writing I read. It doesn't seem to have that sense of trying to impose a vision upon you, upon the material. Instead, it's happy to just kind of suggest that, well, we're in the world, aren't we? We're in the modern world. We all know what's going on. We can just put the names in and just move along, yeah, get into the story. No, so there is one tick. Another one would be, stories where you don't find out who the narrator is for a long time, and when you do, it's a shock. It doesn't really grab me. You're on page 200 and suddenly it's revealed that the I of the narration is a robot or an AI, or it's been multiple narrators, etc. So I find that device can be rather tiresome. And then also, any novel that involves investigating a secret or investigating some kind of mystery, and it seems something that is completely independent of the investigator. However, it forms some kind of connection to their own family and reveals a dark secret from 2 or 3 generations ago, something like that. You know the kind of story I mean. I think that's been done to death as well. Anything with generations of a family, of a single family, is usually pretty wretched. All right, so if I was the narrator of a Bernhard novel, what would be the target of my ire? Which literary or artistic movement? I really don't know. I think it would be these writers that seem to become famous more for how they live, for the brands that they patronize, and for the cities they inhabit and their backgrounds, rather than the actual writing. And when you read interviews with them, the interviewer seems to hang upon their clothing and maybe their hairstyle, or all of these aspects which I feel are really peripheral to being a writer. So I guess in a way what I'm saying is the cult of the writer. It seems to me that there's never been a time when great writing has been in shorter supply, and yet being a writer has had more cultural cachet, more prestige. And so I think maybe Bernhard, my Bernhard narrator, could be attacking that state of affairs. Next we have Baracolo, and they ask, have any book characters stayed with you permanently and changed the way you approach situations? And I'd have to say that the only character that has really had this effect is Joseph K. K in Kafka's fictions, The Trial and The Castle. So still today, when certain situations crop up, I will think, this is just like a scene from a Kafka novel. So that would be the answer there. Next, what are your comfort reads? Okay, comfort reads. So here, my confession would be what are known as the imperial romances. And those would be novels like this. H.G. Rider Haggard's She. I'm a great fan of Haggard. Not all of his work is of the finest literary quality, but I just love these adventures. Conan Doyle's The Lost World, Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, Kidnapped, The Prisoner of Zenda, Erskine Childers' The Riddle of the Sands, The Scarlet Pimpernel, Need I Go On? These are the books I read principally for entertainment. I could have done my thesis on these, my PhD dissertation, if I'd gone to a different university, and that would have been great fun. But instead, these are, as I say, my comfort reads. Here, look, She, a history of adventure. Yeah, adventure novels. I just can't get enough of them. If you have any favourite adventure novels you think I might enjoy, please leave a link to them in the comments. I also like John Buchan, who I mentioned as well, The 39 Steps, and particularly Green Mantle. That was excellent. And Prester John, superb. So, adventure novels, great question again. And Baracolo's final question here. What do you like to do when not working or reading? And the truth is, pretty much nothing, I guess. Although, as I've said already, I do watch my politics, and I do watch English football when the Premier League season is in progress. So every Sunday morning I come downstairs and download Match of the Day and watch that for an hour while I'm eating my breakfast. So those are the things I enjoy, yes. But really it's mostly about working, reading, yes. Okay, one more question, and it is from Eckhart von Hochheim. And this is 5 books, 5 albums on a desert island. Okay, So I'm going to choose 5 plays by Shakespeare as my reading matter, and then 5 albums not by Shakespeare. And they would be Cymbeline, I'm just looking at my pile here, Cymbeline, Coriolanus, As You Like It, Macbeth, and I think it would be Julius Caesar. Okay, I didn't enjoy Antony and Cleopatra quite as much as Coriolanus and Julius Caesar, so I could live without that. And then for the albums, they would be Sonic Youth, Daydream Nation, Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures, Iggy Pop, The Idiot, Galaxy 500, This Is Our Music, and Loop, Fade Out. And Fade Out is what I'm about to do, because we have reached the end of this extremely long 1.5k Q&A. Thank you once again to everyone who posted questions. I hope you are content with my responses, but for now, all that remains is for me to bid you farewell in time-honoured fashion. So, until the next time, be safe, be strong, nanu nanu.